In this lesson, we'll learn how we can quickly create a very simple wood pattern and a wood texture for things like our kitchen cabinets, as well as the kitchen table. Alright, so this kitchen cabinet area that we're going to be working with really encompasses most of these areas that are still left uncolored. So we are going to have pretty much this main area here, as well as pretty much everything back behind here, the exception being the stove as well as the refrigerator. These two objects are going to be a little bit more of a brushed metal type surface. So before we actually start to select our objects, let's go ahead and clear out some of these other materials that we are applied from our previous lesson. So we have this white material. We can call this something like this ceiling material. There we are. Go ahead and, again, just making sure that we are renaming these. There we are. So let's go ahead, clear that out. We'll drop on a new material. Call this something like cabinets material. And again, let's come back to our swatch up here. So this color that we have up here in this upper corner, this is going to be the color that I've chosen for my cabinets. So I'll start with something like that. But before I actually do that, let's start by actually building some kind of a really simple wood type texture for this. Now there's a couple of different ways that we can do this. One method that I find is actually really useful is to use something like the volume noise. Oddly enough, the wood texture that comes with Maya is actually not that great for building wood. So I find that this volume noise, with a little bit of modification, actually does do a pretty good job. So let's start with this volume noise and just make a few quick modifications to this. One thing that I like to do is to switch the noise type to something like wispy. So that way it starts to create some of these a little more kind of soft patterns in here. Now what we can also start to do is to take some of these other values. If we want to, we can start to make some adjustments to these, but I find that actually for the most part, leaving it set like this does a pretty good job to begin with. So we have this volume noise, but now we want to start to give it some coloration. Well, one method that I find is going to be really useful for that is if we go into the utilities, we have a node in here called remap value. Okay, so if we double click on this, what the remap value will essentially do is let us take any kind of black and white value and plug that in, and then actually recolor that. So dark areas can be recolored to any value that we want, or any color value that we want, and light areas can be remapped to any color value. So let's take this volume noise, put that into the input value. For the dark color, what we can do is come in here, switch to our eyedropper. Let's select this color up here that we have set. And what I'll do is go ahead and add that same color kind of down in here. Kind of pull these together. So essentially, from light to dark, it's going to be the exact same color, which is really by itself not very useful. Now, what I like to do is come in here and just between these two, add a new color chip. Go ahead and switch to my color chooser. Pull this down to something like hue saturation value. And I'll take this and make it just a little bit darker than my original value. So now, instead of remapping these different values from light to dark, essentially now just taking these light areas will now be remapped to this color. Over here on this far side, where we have this light color mapped, that will actually remap these darkest values. But in the middle, where we kind of have all these little intermediate values of gray, it'll get remapped to something a little bit darker. And what we'll see is that actually creates some kind of interesting wood grain patterns. Now, again, keep in mind, before we can use this, we do need to gamma correct it. So drop in our gamma correct, middle click, apply that to the value, set our gamma to 0.45 across the board. Now take that gamma correct, plug that into the diffuse of our cabinets. Okay, now let's take our reflectivity, and for the moment, we can bring this down. Okay, now let's go back to our scene here. Let's grab this Place 3D texture. Right now, because our scene is so large, this Place 3D texture is going to be very, very tiny, which means we're going to get a very, very tight pattern in here. So with this selected, Let's come in here and continue to scale this out. It may take a few tries on this until we finally get that scaled out to the appropriate size. Now let's come in here, and with this, start to set that up. Now we can begin the process of assigning this to the different objects in our scene. So I can come in here, just start to shift select all these different pieces of our cabinets. This is going to take just a moment, so I'll go ahead and just pause this for just a moment while I continue to select all these pieces. Okay, so there's all the pieces for that cabinet. If we were to go ahead and take a look at that, basically everything except the sink and this top part of the counter. Right, and I've also not selected any of these little knobs for the cabinet doors. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead, right-click, assign material to selection. Let's go ahead and get back here and do the same thing for some of these other pieces. Again, let me just pause this for just a moment while I go through this process of selecting these. Okay, so that's basically going to be everything back here again besides these countertops. So everything back here. It also includes this cabinet area for this refrigerator, except just not the actual doors of the refrigerator. We'll leave those alone. And I've also gone ahead and selected these top areas of the wood trim. Okay, so with everything else selected, let's go ahead and apply the same cabinet material to those as well. There we are. Now, let's go ahead and see what this looks like when we render this out. So, let's go back to our camera view, open up our render, and let's re-render this. Okay, so once this is done, you can start to see that this texture that we're getting in here really is not a very good substitute for a wood type material. So one of the issues that we have right now is that it just kind of looks like noise. It really doesn't have the appearance of a nice elongated wood grain. Well, that should be pretty easy to fix. What we can do is just come in here. Let's go back to this Place 3D texture. And now let's just simply scale it up. There we are. And by scaling up in this Y-axis, that's now going to stretch this texture a little bit more and start to create a little bit more of a wood grain appearance. Okay, so let's just take a quick render of this. Before we do that, looking at this, if we didn't want to get a noise pattern that was quite so even on both sides, maybe we can try to get something on this noise that has a little bit more of a sharp edge to it. Again, just kind of mimicking something more like wood grain as opposed to something like just rust or corrosion, which is really a little bit more what it looks like we have here. Let's maybe grab one of these little color swatches in here, maybe pull one of these a little bit closer together. So that way we start to get a little bit more of a tightening between some of these color transitions. Might start to make something that looks a little bit more like again, a natural wood grain. So again, back to our camera view. Let's go ahead and save this image for comparison. Let's re-render to see what we have. Alright, so starting to get a little bit closer here. So compared to what we had before, you can see again, just something that looks a little bit more like corrosion. Now this is at least starting to look a little bit better, although that pattern is still not quite where we would want it. So what we might actually do is maybe try to come in and lighten this up a little bit, because you can see that this wood grain that we've tried to sort of create here may be a little bit too intense. So what I might actually do is come in here, go back and just redrop in this value, and maybe make that color variation just a little bit more subtle than what we had before, so that way it's a pretty subtle transition here. Now the last thing I might do is to actually come back and go back to my remap value node. Looking at this, right now I find that this cabinet may actually be a little bit darker than what I want. So rather than going back and adjusting all of the different color swatches that I've set up, what we can do is maybe just very easily come back and just start to increase this gamma just a little bit. As we start to get higher and higher in our gamma values, we'll start to introduce a little bit lighter color into this and start to intentionally wash that out just a little bit more. Again, just trying to get something a little bit closer to the natural color that I'm looking for, but this is purely an artistic choice on my part. There we are. Now that's starting to look a little bit better. So we still have a little bit of a wood grain in here, although it is fairly subtle. but now we have just a little bit lighter coloration with this wood, and you can see these striations and some of these different grain patterns that we've tried to introduce here. They're still there, but they're just a little bit more subtle compared to what we had before. So if we wanted to actually see this a little bit better, this might be a good opportunity to just temporarily come in here, go back to our render settings, go into the quality tab, and we might want to consider increasing our sampling level, so that way we can start to eliminate some of this aliasing noise and actually start to see what this texture looks like with a little bit more detail in here. There we are, very nice. So again, just getting in here a little bit closer, you can start to see where we've kind of wound up now. So just a really, really subtle, really simple little striation pattern in here, just enough to kind of give the impression that we do have some wooden cabinets back here, and it's not just a flat, plain color. Alright, so we'll go ahead and end the lesson at this point. Now, if you're relatively comfortable with this process and you already understand how this is being done, if you want, you can go ahead and actually skip ahead a couple of lessons. If you'd like to see me go through this same process with a little bit different twist on this top kitchen table, we'll actually go ahead and tackle that in our next lesson. So again, if you want to see this done, you can go ahead and proceed to the next lesson. If you're ready to go ahead and skip ahead and start working with some of these other lights, we'll go ahead and do that in the next couple of lessons.